This is chapter 4, part 3. Last time we were going over this visual that you're looking at in front of you about the relationship between drugs and violence and the three different types of ways they might be connected. What you're seeing in front of you now is the same looking visual, but now it's being applied to non-violent criminal behaviors. So let's just review quickly how they can be connected to non-violent crime. So let's start first of all with the pharmacological violence. But here we're talking about, let's see. Okay, right there. Okay, so now they've got it listed as crime instead of violence. Okay, so pharmacological crime, ingestion of drug causing individual to become impulsive and impairing decision-making abilities. So I've been using alcohol. Let me stick with that one. The science shows that by drinking alcohol, it tends to what they call disinhibit someone. It sort of makes them more reckless, more risk-taking, less aware of the negative consequences of behavior, of bad behavior. Less concern about punishment, about bad stuff that's going to happen after you steal something, for example. So it just it makes you more reckless, more willing to take risks. And so that could lead not only to violent behavior, it could lead to non-violent behavior. It could lead to theft. It could lead to various other kinds of crimes. Stealing somebody's car, going for a joyride, getting drunk, hopping in somebody's car, taking their car just to drive it around town and have fun with it. That'd be an example of that, non-violent. Okay, economically compulsive crime. The need for money to buy drugs is the primary motivation for crime. But it might be that you don't commit violence to get the money you need for your habit, for your drug habit. Maybe you just burglarize, break into somebody's apartment when they're not there, take their valuables, go sell their valuables, or if they have cash in the house, take that cash and go to purchase your drugs that you feel that you really, really have to have. So it's driven by compulsion, by this usually a habit we're talking about here. But it doesn't have to be committing violence. I mean, a lot of times violence doesn't bring you any money. Theft of various types, burglary, will bring you money. And if you're using something that has a violent element, often it's going to be robbery, where you take a knife, take a gun, take your buddies, go threaten somebody that they better turn over their wallet or else, that kind of stuff. So that's the economic compulsive reason, or connection, I should say, between drugs and nonviolent crime. Finally, you have systemic crime down on the bottom, and it could be that someone is involved in not even just a single crime here or there, but turning it into like a job, like prostitution, that you might sell sex to raise the money to have drugs. It might be sort of like an economically compulsive crime. But here it's like a business. I run this business because I need money. I want money. I like to have a lot of money so that I can purchase drugs. Also, if you are involved in drug dealing and you're bringing in a bunch of cash, well, you've got to figure out some way to, sort of hide that cash, hide it from law enforcement. Money laundering we'll talk about later is one way to do that, which is an illegal activity. So that's a legal activity that's part of the quote-unquote business of dealing drugs. So the systemic, another example is systemic. So when you think systemic, think the crime that comes sort of as part of the business of drugs. Think organized crime, think gangs, drug gangs, think syndicates, drug trafficking, that kind of stuff. Also political corruption. So maybe you're paying off local law enforcement, you're paying off police officers to ignore the criminal activities that you're involved in. And so, of course, that's illegal. That's criminal to be corrupting people, to be bribing people. and it's non-violent sort of crime, and it's again a crime that's that goes along with the business of dealing in drugs. So just think of that for systemic crime, is what sort of crimes that can go along with the business of dealing, manufacturing drugs. So those you definitely want to be familiar with these two visuals that I've gone over, and be familiar with the way that the different ways that you can have this drug crime connection. Okay, now let's go back up, because actually there's a couple of highlighted points that that I would like to make. Let's see, I think I need to go down one more slide here that we haven't covered some of these yet. Okay, this one we have covered. Okay, that we've covered. Okay, so this is the kind of follow-up points to those visuals that we just covered. Drug-related crimes, which is what we were talking about in those visuals, are usually thought to be violent, but they could be property crimes as well, and we've just gone over this. So this is kind of a summary point here. Drugs might reduce inhibition or increase recklessness. So think of how the drugs can sort of impair your judgment, and you might commit crimes because your judgment is impaired by that drug. Again, alcohol is a good example of this sort of thing. And usually you find that the things that do drive a lot of crime are this sort of recklessness, this risk taking, this thinking that you're invincible, the fearlessness, not being afraid of getting caught, or either by law enforcement or being retaliated against by other people, that kind of stuff. So it's this short-sightedness, thinking about all the rewards you're going to get right now and dismissing the bad stuff that's going to come later. The textbook claims that we know with certainty that economically compulsive crimes, so those are those that choose the drug addict who steals for money to buy drugs, and the systemic crime, the crime that comes from businesses, from drug businesses, far exceed psychopharmacological violence. But I think that they may very well be right if they're excluding alcohol, because alcohol is, for those who are old enough, it is a legal type of drug. But it can be questioned if you include alcohol. There's not certainty there, I would say. I would just push back a little bit and say there's not certainty, definitely, if you include alcohol, because a lot of crimes involve alcohol, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. Violent crimes, property crimes, but especially violent crimes. Well, there's a lot of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, family violence, ordinary violence, violence in a bar, violence at a party, violence at a barbecue. A lot of that involves especially alcohol. And so if you throw in alcohol, and alcohol is consumed by a great percentage, a high percentage of people. And so that's really, in a way, that's sort of the 800-pound gorilla when we're talking about crimes, especially violence, where there's this pharmacological effect. The drug is affecting your behavior, right? So they're kind of, I think when they say that this is not very common, they're excluding alcohol, and they're saying, well, this doesn't happen very much with marijuana. It doesn't happen very often with hard drugs. Like yes, it does with heroin and cocaine and meth, but not as much as economically compulsive crimes, or not as much as systemic drug dealing, drug organization sort of crimes. And this again can be, it's not, to me, it's not so certain as they think. Let me make another point to back this up, to sort of, again, to kind of push back and show another side to it. The textbook stresses gang-related violence, which is a lot of the systemic stuff, right? The organized crime, the business crimes that go along with dealing in drugs. But if you look at the statistics about violent crimes, particularly homicide, which we're most concerned about, which is the most serious, type of violence. But also less common, or I shouldn't say that, they're actually more common, but slightly less serious crimes. Aggravated assault or sexual assault and rape, which are very serious crimes. The vast majority of these various different types of violent crimes are not connected to a gang, have nothing to do with gangs. Most domestic violence doesn't have anything to do with a gang. Most violence at a party, at the bar, at the barbecue on the street corner doesn't have anything to do with gangs. Gangs are usually a small, not small, but yeah, I think you could characterize it as a small percent of all violence. Now you can get a picture in major gang cities like Los Angeles or Chicago. You might get 40% of all homicides that are gang related. You could get high numbers in a big city that has a lot of gangs like those. But across the United States and in most cities and smaller cities and towns in the countryside, a very low percentage of homicides or aggravated assaults or these other sorts of violent crimes, domestic violence, very low percentage of them are gang related. They're just individuals who have beefs with each other, and they're one-on-one sort of violence. Most of the time it's not group violence, it's not gang violence. And a lot of those crimes, violent crimes, ordinary violent crimes, involve drugs, especially alcohol. So they're focusing on the organized violence a lot, but that's a minority of incidents of violence in the United States. And the United States has a problem with gangs, has a problem with organized crime, but it's still a fairly small percentage of all violence. And I should add, it's not only in ordinary violence. Not only is the perpetrator often intoxicated, the victim is also often intoxicated as well under the influence. So this is a very common sort of occurrence where the perpetrator and or the victim are under the influence during a violent assault, whatever the context, intimate partner violence, ordinary violence like in a bar or something, these are the most common sorts of violence that you see. Again, lots of alcohol mixed in with that, and to a lesser extent, other drugs. Okay, so we've been over these two visuals. Let's move to the next one. Now, this is the third sort of area that they're covering for different ways of looking at how drugs and crime are connected, and here's lifestyle. By drug-using lifestyle, we mean the category that focuses more on the intersection of the connection between drugs and crime based on a more general deviant lifestyle and deviant friends. Really, I think the textbook, except when they're talking about gangs, they don't stress quite as much as straight sociology would stress in this area the importance of the peer group. You see the term peer group used, you see the term friendship group, delinquent peer group, because a lot of the focus is on teenagers and adolescents. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of crime, especially among delinquents, among teenagers, a lot of crime, and definitely a lot of drugs, are consumed in a social setting. Not necessarily a gang, just friends. Very often it's just friends who hanging out together and commit crimes together, not alone. A great deal of delinquency is committed with not alone, not solo, but with friends, peers anyway. And same thing for using drugs. People use drugs in groups, at parties and social situations when they're hanging out, and they get introduced to drugs and they learn how to use drugs and come to use them regularly, very often with their friends. And it's atypical if somebody learns to use drugs and uses them alone. That's just not the way it works. This is a very social thing. So these things come together in a lifestyle with your friends, with your peers. And so you can see how drugs and crime are all kind of mixed up with the people you're hanging out with. And so this lifestyle is in a really important way to understand. Well, how come that we see the correlation between drugs and crime? Well, it's because people who hang out together who are doing one tend to do the other. It's kind of a lifestyle, rebellious, countercultural, deviant, if you want to call it that, meaning going against the norms of society, a type of activity. And so, very important to understand that this is one major way why you see drugs and crime connected, is because people hanging out together who do one tend to do the other. Not of course, not everybody. There's plenty of friends who are using drugs who don't commit crimes, but we're talking about correlations here, a tendency for those two to go hand in hand. And that's completely borne out, supported by the research. It's not me talking here. That's the data that says that these things, that if you do these things, you often do them with your friends. That's especially among adolescents, but even among adults as well. Okay, let's continue on in the next segment.